remember when Joker was a topic of discussions last year? I found most of them boring and contrived, but the movie itself resembled Taxi Driver quite a bit, which is always a good thing. However, I don't think drawing comparisons with Scorsese movies led people in the right direction, as a lot of people thought the point of the movie was that mentally ill people are unfairly marginalized. Which is why I'd rather compare it to a movie I haven't seen anyone mention yet, Forrest Gump. As a child, Forrest was physically and mentally challenged. The prior attracted bullies, while the latter had his mother prostituting herself in order to put him through public school. His father, as the novel that inspired the movie explains, died in a work-related accident, so his mom had to rent the house out to make a living. Meanwhile, Arthur was abandoned and sent to a city orphanage to be adopted by Penny Fleck, a delusional and narcissistic woman who stood by as one of her boyfriends abused him, which led to his depression, as well as his laughing condition. These mental health issues set them on their respective paths to greatness, whatever you take that to mean. But what's interesting is that both of them are misunderstood by their admirers. Arthur becomes a symbol of riots, but when asked about it, he renounces any sort of political intent to his actions. And when Forrest runs across America, he begins being idolized and followed, and people start attributing motives of activism to what he's doing, to which he promptly responds,
"I just felt like running."
This autistic indifference to politics is honestly admirable. But despite their similarities, only one of them has a happy ending. Care to take a guess why? You could say it's because they're different movies with different intentions, but I think that's the easy answer. They both had horribly tragic childhoods, so that couldn't have been it. Their luck with relationships wasn't that much different, since Arthur didn't manage to go on a date with Sophie outside his head, and Forrest couldn't get with Jenny until she was soon to be dead. Neither of their later lives were on easy street, as Arthur lives in terrible conditions with his mother and has to work an awful job in which he gets tyrannized by his boss, who shows no empathy for him when he gets robbed and beaten. And Forrest, well, he gets to watch his best friend Bubba die in his arms during Vietnam. What then makes them different from one another? The answer is, one of them had a good mother, the other did not. Think about it. The first fantasy revenge sequence of Joker happens now when Arthur is getting beaten and robbed, but when his boss doesn't acknowledge it. I suspect that this triggered his violent thoughts because it mirrored what bothered him the most about his childhood. Not the violence he received from a complete stranger, but how his mother, whom he genuinely cared for, allowed it to happen. Up until the events of the movie, Arthur seemed to pull through his dreadful job in spite of his mental illness and the merciless environment he inhabited. The injustice he suffered at the hands of the world he could endure because he could understand it. At the start of the movie, teenagers jumped him in order to take his stuff, as they repeatedly said. People are awful, and always have been, but Arthur could take it, and better than some sane people could, considering he was able to hold a job and sustain both himself and his mother. Though the world's abuse certainly shook him, it hadn't ever gotten him to snap and violently strike back. By the time he does, he's in his 30s, which isn't exactly the peak of aggression in males. I've seen a lot of people blame this on him not taking his meds anymore, but when he kills the guys in the subway, he's still on them. So what gives? Does his unfair marginalization contribute to it? Yes. Are the meds somehow related in a CIA kind of way? Probably. But I think the surroundings of his violent outbursts reveal the true answer. The first time he kills, he runs away, terrified of what he had just done, and hides in a bathroom. He's still acting under the notion that what he did was wrong, and this is evident in that he continues to take his meds and fantasizes about being with Sophie. He still yearns to be a normal person. In his second outburst, not so much, since he kills his mother very calmly and then stays in the room. This is crucial, because early on in the movie, when he fantasizes about being on Murray's show, he probably says he takes care of his mother, and then imagines himself getting applauded for it, which means it's something he thinks is praiseworthy. When Thomas Wayne says she'd been committed, he becomes extremely upset, obviously, since he was devoted to the point of bathing her. In a way, his dedication kept him bound to humanity, since she was the only person he maintained a roughly positive relationship with. That is, until he finds out that she wasn't his mother and she let him get abused as a child, and let him live under the impression that these things weren't the case. Additionally, she lied to him about who his father was, which led him to make a fool of himself, and dangerously so. It's when this piece of the puzzle comes together that his demeanor changes from that of a miserable guy struggling with bad thoughts to a cold and apathetic murderer. This transition begins when he's in the staircase reading his file, reaches its peak when he murders his mother, and concludes when he trashes his clown mask after gleefully watching the cops get overcome by a mob. And he does away with the mask because he's no longer split between being his normal self and his shadow. He's made his choice. And, like Forrest, embracing his abnormality brought incredible fortune with it, as he gets to go on the Murray Franklin show after his catastrophic set. I take this to mean that there are a lot of benefits to embracing your shadow, which I'll get deeper into in the Fight Club video. Regardless, it's worth noting that under different circumstances, Arthur's method of vengeance would have been taking this backhanded opportunity to brand himself as Gotham's underdog alternative comedian, trumping the disingenuous invitation. Maybe his earnestly odd personality would have been met with positive reactions, maybe even from Sophie. But we'll never know, because he proceeds to murder Murray Franklin, a man he saw as a makeshift father figure in the beginning of the film. This is not a coincidence, as Arthur sarcastically alludes to the system that knows so much as a moral arbiter. He resents society not because of political reasons, as he clarifies, but because he sees it as just another parental figure with nothing to offer but cruelty and indifference. I also find it pithy that he comments on what's right and wrong being subjective right before he commits a murder. He is still technically agreeing with that belief. The only difference is he disagrees with the audience's opinion on what's wrong. The tyrannical father will make you do something you don't want to. The devouring mother will make you act as if you enjoyed it. This is evident in how Arthur's mom told him to be happy when he had every reason to be the opposite. And now, as he says it, he's tired of pretending. When Arthur says he has a problem with Thomas Wayne, I don't think it has anything to do with class. I think it has everything to do with Arthur having briefly believed Thomas was his dad. Considering Arthur's use of childish terms like good little boys and going werewolf, it seems much more likely that he meant father figures instead of the rich when he said men like Thomas Wayne. Some may think the cut of public funding that stopped Arthur's treatment was a hint of political motivation, but consider the following. He was still depressed while taking 7 different prescriptions, and openly expressed he liked it better when he was locked up in the hospital. And understandably so, considering his therapist would tell him nobody cared about people like him the moment after he said he only had negative thoughts. And, as I've already pointed out, the first time he killed he was still in treatment, so I don't think it helped. It's also worth noting that, 30 years before the movie takes place, the same state responsible for this pathetic psychotherapy allowed a single woman with prior admissions to a mental hospital and a history of drug use to adopt Arthur when he was a child. If that's not enough, think of how the actually politically motivated rioters ended up venerating a murderer. I don't think political explanations suffice. Going back to what I was saying earlier, in Forrest Gump's ending, Forrest asks himself if we all have a destiny or if everything's just accidental, coming to the conclusion that it's both. Putting aside that that's the same conclusion Boethius reaches in the 5th chapter of Consolation, I think Arthur's philosophy hinges more on the first option, and his destiny, as his mother prophesied, was to spread joy and laughter. And she was right, because at the end, he did find an audience who appreciated his comedy. I've seen criticisms about the Waynes' death scene being unnecessary fan service, but from this perspective, it makes complete sense. As Arthur departed from his parental figures, so did Bruce. Though some people dispute whether Penny was actually lying about Thomas Wayne or not, it doesn't matter anymore, because senseless cruelty has become the father of both. They're perpetually bound by their sense that it happens, and that's life.